You know, when I sit down and try to talk about what happened out there in Greenland, I still get that feeling in my chest like the cold air is trying to press in again. It's been a while, but when you spend days buried under snow, with nothing but thin nylon walls and your own stubborn willpower between you and the void, it kind of brands itself on you. I don't think you ever really lose that. And I guess the best way to tell it is just straight like how it actually happened, because it wasn't some dramatic movie thing with swelling music. It was slow, it was quiet, it was uncomfortable, and it was deadly serious. So I was part of this small team of geologists, right? There were 5 of us. We were up in Greenland for fieldwork, collecting samples and logging data about the bedrock and glacial deposits in a remote region. We weren't anywhere near the towns, not even the smaller stations. We had flown in by helicopter and got dropped off with our gear and supplies, planning to spend maybe 2 weeks out there before getting picked up again. That was the plan, at least. You make a plan and then you hope the Arctic agrees with you. Now, storms in Greenland. Look, we knew they could come fast. We knew the weather could turn in ways that make the forecast look like a joke. But you still rely on the forecast because that's all you've got. And the forecast didn't say anything like what we got hit with. It started with wind. At first, just those gusts that make the tent fabric snap and whip. We'd had that before, so none of us thought too much about it. Then the wind didn't let up, it just kept building, and within maybe an hour or two the snow started driving sideways. It wasn't falling, it was flying. You couldn't see 20 feet outside. Inside the tents it felt like being inside a drum, the fabric just vibrating constantly, the poles straining. We anchored them well when we set up camp, but there's only so much you can do when the ground is frozen gravel and the wind decides to test every knot and stake. The radio was still working at that point, and we called in, let the station know we had heavy weather. They told us to sit tight, that the storm band wasn't expected to last more than a day. We figured fine, we'd wait it out. Except it didn't ease. It just got worse. The snow was piling up around the tents faster than we could shovel it clear. We took turns, rotating every hour or so, digging at the drifts just to keep the entrances from being sealed. You'd step outside with goggles and mask, and the wind would just punch you sideways. It was like being sandblasted, only with frozen needles. And then the radio. I'll never forget the moment we lost it. Static first, then nothing. Just that dead, empty hiss. We tried everything, adjusting the antenna, moving the unit, swapping batteries. But it was gone. And that, more than the storm itself, was the moment the bottom dropped out of my stomach. Because storms pass, right? But when you can't tell anyone where you are, when you can't hear anyone's voice on the other end, that's when you realize how small you actually are out there. That night, one of the tents partially collapsed. The poles bent, fabric sagged under the weight of snow and ice, and 3 of us had to crawl out in the dark and fight to get it propped back up. The temperature dropped hard. Inside, we could see our breath hanging in the air like smoke, and our sleeping bags didn't feel half as warm as they had before. Everyone was shivering, everyone was exhausted, and we all knew, though nobody wanted to say it, that if this storm dragged on, we couldn't just sit there. It was on the second day, maybe mid-morning, when we started talking seriously about snow caves. One of the guys, Anders, had experience from military training in Norway, and he kept saying that a cave, if you dig it right, is way more stable and insulated than a tent in those conditions. At first it sounded like too much work. We were already drained, already fighting just to keep the tent standing. But then another pole snapped and that settled it. We packed what we could and we started digging. Digging in snow sounds easy until you try it. This wasn't light fluffy snow, it was wind-packed, dense, heavy stuff. We had shovels, thank God, and we worked in shifts. 2 digging, 2 hauling snow out, 1 resting. The cave started as a crawl, just enough to wriggle in, and then we widened it, carved out a chamber, and made little shelves to sit on. The trick is you make the entrance lower than the main chamber so the cold air sinks, and your body heat actually stays in the living space. Took us maybe 6 hours to get something usable. By the end we were drenched in sweat under our layers, which is dangerous too, because sweat means freezing once you stop moving. But when we crawled in and felt that stillness, no wind, no flapping fabric, no constant noise, it was like stepping into another world. Quiet. Close. Almost warm. We didn't abandon the tents completely. We left some gear in them, and one of us would go check every now and then, just to make sure we hadn't lost everything. But for sleeping and surviving, the caves were it. We ended up digging two side by side, connected by a little tunnel, so we could still stick together as a group. Now, food and water. That became the main thing on everyone's mind after the first 2 days. We had dry rations, military-style packs. Enough under normal circumstances for the planned 2 weeks, but with the extra energy we were burning in the cold and the digging, we knew we had to stretch them. We agreed. 2 meals a day, half portions. It was bland, it was small, but it kept us from empty stomachs. For water, we melted snow in metal pots with little camp stoves. You think snow is water, but it takes an incredible amount of snow to make even half a liter of liquid. And you have to be careful not to just eat snow, because that drops your core temperature fast. So every hour or so, someone would tend the stove, feeding it little bits of fuel, melting pan after pan. The sound of that hiss became like background music. By day 3, the storm was still raging. We had no way of knowing time except for watches, and sometimes those felt meaningless because the light outside never changed, just this dim gray swirl. Inside the cave, you'd lose track. We talked, we told each other stories. Sometimes we just sat in silence listening to the wind above us. The silence was worse, honestly, because silence made you think too much about how far away you were from anything. I remember one night in particular. It must have been the 4th night, because our rations were already down to strict measures. I was lying in my bag, every joint aching from cold, listening to one of the guys breathing unevenly in the dark. I kept thinking, what if he doesn't wake up? What if tomorrow morning one of us is just frozen? We were doing everything right, layering, staying dry, eating, drinking, but the margin for error was razor thin. And every hour that thought circled in my head, we can't last much longer. We tried to keep spirits up. Anders would crack these dry little jokes, and we'd laugh more than they deserved. Just because laughing made you feel human again. Another guy, Miguel, kept a small notebook and wrote in it by headlamp, even when his hands were stiff and shaking. He said he wanted a record in case. In case. Nobody liked hearing that, but nobody stopped him either. By the 5th day, the storm finally eased. It didn't stop suddenly, it just lost its teeth. The wind dropped from screaming to moaning, and then to gusts. When we finally crawled out, blinking in the light, the world looked alien. The tents were half-buried mounds. The landscape was just white, no features, no horizon. And that's when the reality hit us. Even though the storm had passed, we were still alone, cut off, and no radio. We had no way of signaling, not immediately. We talked about trying to hike out, but the nearest known station was far beyond what we could manage with our energy and supplies. So we did the only thing that made sense. We stayed put and hoped the emergency protocols would kick in. See, when you don't check in, when the radio goes dark, eventually someone sends a search. We just had to last until then. It was the middle of that day, maybe, when we heard it. A low thumping, faint at first. We stumbled out of the caves, craning our necks. And there it was, a helicopter black speck against the sky, beating its way toward us. I swear, I felt my knees go weak just seeing it. We scrambled, waving, throwing bright fabric into the snow, anything to mark ourselves. And the chopper swung closer, circled, and then descended. I can't even explain the relief. The cold, the hunger, the fear. It all crashed down at once when I realized we weren't going to die out there. They bundled us in, gave us hot packs, wrapped us, and in less than an hour we were back at a base station, safe. Just like that. 5 days of holding on, and then safety as quick as flicking a switch. Looking back, I think what saved us wasn't luck, though we had plenty of that too. It was the decision to dig those caves. Without them, the tents would have failed, and we'd have frozen, no question. It was rationing, discipline, keeping each other moving, talking, alive. And it was the simple fact that we didn't give up. You'd be amazed how tempting it is to just close your eyes, stop shivering, and let the cold take you. But we didn't. We held on. And now, when I sit here and tell it, I still see the snow walls glowing dimly in the headlamp light. I still hear the hiss of the stove. I still feel that endless wind battering above us. It was 5 days, but it felt like an entire lifetime compressed into a single stretch of survival. And if you ask me what it was like, it was cold, it was hungry, it was terrifying. But it was also the purest reminder I've ever had that life, fragile as it is, can endure more than you think, if you fight for it and if you fight together.